Welcome to the Holistic Psychiatry Podcast. I'm Courtney Brown Snyder, a physician and holistic adult and child psychiatrist. I'm delighted to share a conversation I had recently with Eric Windheim, a building biologist and electromagnetic radiation specialist, on smart meters. Recently, I talked about the impact of electromagnetic fields on the brain and the range of symptoms that EMF can cause. I also talked about ways that we can lower our exposure to radio frequencies and mentioned very briefly that one of the ways we can do that is to opt out of having a smart meter on our home. And it turns out that Eric is just the person to talk to about smart meters. For the last 10 years, Eric has been certified as an electromagnetic radiation specialist, as well as a certified building biology environmental consultant, and he has completed the radio frequency safety officer course. And currently is the owner of Windheim Environmental Solutions and specializes in EMF assessment and abatement, providing inspection, testing, and remediation. In 2012, Eric founded and became the director of the Sacramento Smart Meter Awareness Action Group. In 1 year, without an attorney or funding, he and dedicated local leaders successfully prevailed against Sacramento Municipal Utility District in regaining the safe and reliable analog meter option for all Sacramento County. This is considered a national victory, with this being the first municipal electric utility allowing customers to again use analog meters. Eric has worked with others nationwide to achieve similar results. So without further delay, here's Eric Windheim. Eric, good to have you here. Thank you for bringing your expertise and wisdom. As you know, EMF is a big player when it comes to brain-related symptoms. So I'm glad that you can share your experience. Tell us how you got into this area and this type of work. It's really fascinating.
Well, it really literally was, I would say, the hand of God. He picked me out to challenge my utility. And before I had the battle with the utility over the smart meter, um, I noticed that my parents had about a 9-year decline in health. Mom got cancer twice, 2 strokes. Dad got peripheral neuropathy and dementia, and he became very obstinate and hard to work with, and irrational. And by that I mean using the family pickup truck as a bulldozer to move furniture around on the driveway.
Oh
Um,
my.
so my mom and dad collapsed. We had to bring them up to Sacramento to live in assisted living. And dad's peripheral neuropathy and dementia, well, his peripheral neuropathy went away overnight. His dementia remained. Mom was diagnosed in September 2009 with incurable stage 4 metastatic breast cancer, tumors throughout her whole body, dozens and dozens of them in the chest area. So eventually, Mom did die of pneumonia. She did not die of cancer. And we had this original X-ray of September 2009 versus the one that they took a week before she died. So we reviewed them, and he says, okay, so the comparison is the week before she died, there's far fewer tumors, significantly less. Most of the tumors are much smaller. And there is one new one and one larger one, but overall, the total mass and number of tumors has significantly decreased. And I said, well, that along with my dad's 50% recovery as soon as we got him out of the house, that's kind of interesting. It seemed like the house was sick.
Yeah. And
And
had you already measured the house prior to their moving? Did you
yes,
measure EMF in the house?
in the fall of 2008, I bought a Stetzer meter, which measures dirty electricity. And I took it down to their house and plugged it in, and it went off the top of the scale. And I figured, must be broken or something. I didn't realize how bad it really was. It was actually 470 times over the extreme concern level. So that was a contributing factor. Um, and then about a month after my mom died, in April of 2010, I went to a county fair and
I'm going to interrupt you because before we get to that, just to put in context dirty electricity, can you just briefly comment on the 4 types of EMF so that the listener knows where that fits in dirty electricity and as far as your parents' home?
sure. Well, EMF is a catch-all word, and
Mm-hmm.
there's really 4 separate definable EMFs. There is magnetic fields related to current on an electric wire. There is electric field, which is electrons radiating off the wire. An example
Okay.
of that would be a radio antenna. There is radio frequency radiation. That's from everything from a cell phone, a baby monitor, a Wi-Fi, and a cell tower,
Mm-hmm.
wireless communication, radio stations.
And a
And then,
smart meter, which you'll be talking about. Mm-hmm.
yes, and then there's also um, dirty electricity. So dirty electricity is created by, sadly, almost all electrically powered devices that are, quote, energy efficient or
Okay.
green. And,
And so was that the case in your parents' home? Do you know what the primary source would have been for their home?
without a doubt, after I got trained and certified and got my equipment, I
Mm-hmm.
went back and tested their home, and I was just sick to the pit of my stomach because all of their sickness, number one, was avoidable
Mm.
by choosing the proper type of light bulbs and light switches. The dirty electricity in their house was 475 times over the danger, the hazard, the extreme hazard level. And so I went to this fair, and there's a booth by the local electric utility, PG&E. They're actually quite large.
Mm-hmm.
And they're talking about this new kind of electric meter, and the big sign said, "Your meter is ready for an upgrade." Whoopee.
And
So I
this was, if I remember, around 2010, so about 14,
April
15 years ago.
2010.
Okay.
My mom passed in March
Mm-hmm.
2010.
Okay.
So I asked him, what's so good about this meter? Oh, it uses radio frequency signals to communicate with us at headquarters, so we don't need to send a man out to read your meter.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can train your family to use electricity during the off-peak times of day, like 1 or 2 a.m. or something like that, you can get electricity at a lower cost. So, well, all
Mm.
that sounds good, but tell me more about these transmissions. Oh no, there's signals. No, it's a transmission. They owned it. They said, no, it's a signal. Okay, you're emitting radiation. How much? I don't know. How many per day? I don't know. How powerful are they? I don't know. And I said, wait a minute. You're from the utility. You work for PG&E and you know nothing about what this meter actually does. So I started looking into it because, it's easy to smell a lie when people give you 3 I don't knows in a row. And I found out that these meters are hurting people, particularly if these meters are on or close to the bedroom area. People have headache, fatigue,
Mm-hmm.
insomnia, nightmares, agitation, anxiety, irritability, cardiac irregularities, including depression and even suicidal thoughts and nosebleeds.
Right.
So I said, holy smoke, I got to look into this some more. And then, not too long after that, my own utility sent out a notice with this flyer that says, your meter is ready for an upgrade. So I said, wait a minute, that's the same blurb that I heard from the other utility. Who's feeding this utility the script? It seems like
Mm-hmm.
the same chapter and verse, song, and dance. So they sent me this brochure, which I have right here, and they said, is it safe? Yes, period. That means universally inclusive. And then they made some mistakes. They said it's the same power as a cell phone. It only transmits 6 times per day, and the transmission is only 50 milliseconds in length. So all totaled, the total length of the transmission is only maybe 5 minutes per day,
Hmm.
even though it could be 10,000 individual transmissions. So
And let me just interrupt you 1 second, just to put this in context. So this is the beginning of what is now the norm. I mean, most utility companies are using smart meters.
sadly, yes, right.
Okay. Just for
Um,
people listening that aren't even familiar with smart meters, this is what likely most of the people
yeah.
listening would have. Go ahead.
And if you have a smart meter, it's going to have a flashing digital display,
Mm-hmm.
just numbers.
Right.
You might
Thank
also
you.
notice that has a little number up at the top called FCC ID, and that's the number of the federal permit. Now, the
Okay.
old safe analog meter had dials and gears. It looked like the inside of a wristwatch, gears and dials. That's the electromechanical analog meter. It's totally
Right.
benign. The
And,
smart
and
meters,
what we're going to be getting to, just to keep people tuned in, is what they options that they can consider, so that people listening aren't feeling like we're all doomed with these smart meters. But go ahead. I want people to know that there's
well,
hopeful
I
and
would,
helpful resources here.
no smart meter has increased anybody's health whatsoever.
Right.
And they have harmed quite a few people, one
Hmm.
at a time, sooner or later. It's a very, very quick, sharp snap of a transmission, which goes from zero to full power and back to zero again in far less than a second. So it's like the snap of a bullwhip. Um, so it didn't take too long, and then the utility came to my front door. And my wife said, Eric, there's a man with a meter in his hand in the front yard. And our dog was going crazy. So I went out there and just out of instinct, I said, you're trespassing. Get off my property. If they
Wow.
miss a meter, they get a dock and pay.
And
But
can
when you,
you comment, Eric, on the financial incentives of the utility companies with tie it in with what you were just saying?
well, yeah, number one, like my utility saved about $30 million a year just by firing the meter readers. You know, they drive around and they have a clipboard and they write down the number of your analog meter. That's time
Right.
consuming. And of
Sure.
course, there's lock gates and dogs to contend with. Now, what happened during the Obama administration, there was this right after the 2008 financial crash. The Obama administration says, okay, this is the American Reconstruction Act. And they had a lot of, quote, shovel ready jobs to get people back to work. And one of them was the smart meter. So the Department of Energy gave grants to utilities to buy the meters and to pay for the installation. So the
Hmm.
utilities go, oh, goody,
Right. Right.
free.
Right.
And it's going to save us uh, labor. Oh, and also if somebody doesn't pay their bill, we just push a button and that cuts their power off.
Hmm.
Wow, this is
Hmm.
wonderful. You see, the funny thing was the utility would not give you any reason that you could not have a smart meter. They don't care whether you said you were hurting, your nose was bleeding, you have pounding headaches.
Right.
They would simply say, we know you're sincere, but we don't believe you. So I spoke at my utility board meetings and
Hmm.
committee meetings 97 times. We brought in dozens and dozens and dozens of injured people with sworn declarations of harm and injury, and we served them on the board of directors and put them on the record. That made him a little nervous, but what really made him nervous when I said, you have lied and or you're incompetent or both,
Hmm.
because we have sworn evidence in court that your meter, your exact meter, transmits 10,000 to 190,000 times a day. So you're wrong on that. Secondarily, we have sworn test. Your own engineer here went out and tested this smart meter from this woman that is suffering so badly. And he says the length of the transmission is 1,450 milliseconds. That's 1.4 seconds. But your flyer here that you gave everybody in the mail says
Right.
only 50 milliseconds. That's a huge difference. Then
Hmm.
on top of that, you said the smart meter is about the same power as a cell phone. But your engineer tested my cell phone and the smart meter one after the other, and it clearly shows that your smart meter has peak power 240 times above what
Wow.
my cell phone puts out. So you're
Hmm.
wrong 3 times.
Hmm.
It's, you're very unlucky or very incompetent or very deceptive. It really doesn't matter. Since people are being harmed and you don't seem to be knowledgeable or honest, that entitles me to my God given, constitutionally protected right of self defense. So here is
Hmm.
my notice of self defense. You have lost all of your easements due to your incompetence and your deception. And over here, we have all of your oaths of office. All you 7 board directors, you're elected officials. You have to obey the Constitution and all laws. And there are actually $5,000 fines and jail times for people that articulate or publish knowingly false information. You're not allowed to lie. So
So would
my
you say what they did and what you fought successfully is still being communicated to utility customers around the country, that same information, or do you think
well, see,
it's
this is
being
the
finessed in a way that's allowing them to get these smart meters on, not be charged with, you know, deception?
now. Early on, we noticed that one utility after another all across the country was using the same chapter and verse, song,
Mm-hmm.
and dance,
Right.
almost as if they cut and pasted a paragraph out of somebody's script. So they are all spouting the same piece of propaganda, and that can only come,
Still?
information comes from above.
Oh, okay. And you think that's still the case today? I mean, this was
Well, they have wised up a little bit. They don't
okay.
talk about the number of transmissions. They
Okay.
don't talk about the relative power to a cell phone. They don't talk about the length of the transmissions because word got out.
It sounds like what you did impacted what's available to people in terms of opting out nationally.
Yeah, the first opt out was with PG&E, a California-based mega private corporation utility.
And we should say what opt out. Go ahead and just explain what
Opt
opt
out
out means.
means I don't want the smart meter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to retain my analog meter or have it returned to me if you already put the smart meter on the wall. That means
Right.
I want my analog meter back.
Where someone comes back out and checks the meter.
Yeah. So the second opt out was with my utility, Sacramento Municipal Utility District. Yeah, it's the 6th largest one in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a municipal utility, so it has elected board members, and therefore they're subject to the Constitution and all laws.
Right. Okay.
So we won our case just by going and speaking for our allowed 3 minutes twice per month. They heard nothing about the health damage, but as soon as we caught them in lies about the
Mm-hmm.
length of the transmission, the strength of the transmission, the duration of the transmission, they stopped like a deer in the headlight.
Okay. Right.
And we were allowed to retain, and then that was in December of 2012. And in March 2013, they had an official board meeting that made it official that we could keep the analog meter or have it returned.
Mm-hmm.
And then other utilities fought their own battle. And I started getting involved with people that were calling me from all over the country. And it turned into a nonstop avalanche of phone calls coming in for people that wanted to know how to stop it.
The impact that your deep research and advocacy sort of brought you fully into this, but yet you hadn't achieved certification, which you went on to do.
Yeah, so I got trained and certified through the International Institute of Building Biology and Ecology, which is in its 37th year here in the United States. And it's the world's foremost training center for training building biologists. We are
Mm-hmm.
house doctors. Our
Mm-hmm.
actual goal is to minimize the presence of man-made electromagnetic radiation in the
Right.
built environment. You want to be able to use and enjoy technology, but in a way that doesn't harm you. And
Which is a great point to because for people listening, they're living in many different places and will have different experiences with their own utility company. But it really does take inquiring and speaking up. I mean, now, hopefully 15 years later, it's not a surprise, or 14, 15 years later, it's not a surprise when someone asks. I live in a rural area, and in the last year, they switched over to smart meters. And there was, there wasn't, oh, you have an option. And I had to reach out and was told they're safe, they're safe. And then I was told it was only myself and one other person that was requesting to opt out. But they did it, and they took off, which you might comment on, that middle ground meter that's not analog and that's not a smart meter.
Okay.
That middle, somewhat problematic one was what was on the house before they were switching to smart, and then I was able to get analog. So in my case, it benefited me, these changes. But
So
comment on that.
there's really several kinds of so-called smart meters. Now, the word smart meter has got a black eye because that's what they first used to
Right.
propagate this propaganda
They're
upon us.
changing the name up. They're finessing it. Yes.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
aliases. People that have aliases don't want to be found out.
Right.
So the true AMI, or full-fledged smart meter, is a two-way transceiver. It transmits 10,000 to 100,000 times per day to tell the utility how much electricity you're using. So that's the full-fledged AMI, automatic metering infrastructure meter. It transmits to the utility, and the utility sends information back to it, like increase the power of the wireless radiation, shut off their meter because they're late in their bill, etc. The next one is what's called a digital non-transmitting meter. It's the same as a smart meter, but without a transmitter. So the utility has to come out and read it. Although it does use an electronic switch mode power supply, just like the smart meter, and it can make pulses of dirty electricity onto your house. Then there's a third
And just
variant.
if I can just comment on that, that would be a surge throughout the house, throughout the electric wiring,
Yes, it
that could
transmits.
create periodically. Yes. Okay.
Not periodically, many, many times per second.
I see.
Um,
Okay.
then you get to the really safe one, which is the gear-driven analog meter. Analog means mechanical, so it's the electromechanical analog meter, and has little dials and gears that look like clock dials. That one's
And the
totally
numbers look like they would
the
turn.
numbers look like
Yes.
an odometer on your
Okay.
car, the way they
So if
used to
someone
be.
doesn't have that, then they don't have a analog, basically, correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
you should be able, the analog, you can look in through the glass globe and see the dials and the gears turning.
Okay.
And that's the safe one. Everything else is harmful to one degree or another, and some very much so.
There will still be utility companies that will say it's not an option to opt out.
Well, sometimes I'm at the home when they call into the utility and I'm listening in, and the utility says, we don't have an opt-out program. So I have a standard script for the client to say, gee, you must be new here. I'm looking at your website and it says I have a quote choice of a smart meter or an analog meter. Do you want to clarify your statement you just made? Because otherwise it sounds like fraud, bait, and switch. And say, no, 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 we don't have any more of those analog meters. Okay, so I'm going to give you an opportunity to go and talk to your supervisor because you seem to be part of a fraud, bait, and switch movement, according to the California Department of Consumer Affairs. Your website says you advertise an analog meter. I'm going to give you one last chance. And if they still say, no, we don't have any, you just hang up and hit redial. And it's quite often the next representative is going to tell you the truth. And
And if it doesn't, it might not say that though on the website, correct? It could just not say there's an option.
Yeah, and if there is no option, they say we don't have an opt-out policy. Well, then you have to raise holy hell. And it's easier with a public utility because you are, quote, a customer owner and you have voting rights in this government called
Hmm.
a municipal utility district. If it's a for-profit corporation like a stock company that has stock on the stock exchange,
Hmm.
you will never be able to speak to the CEO or the board of directors. So sometimes those rural cooperatives, they are also member owners. So you as a payer can go and speak at public meetings. And this is your opportunity to go and speak with authority at
Hmm.
a public meeting because you are a client customer owner. In any event, you've got to do everything you can to get the smart meter off your house because the damage I've seen, it injures people so badly that even when they get away from these and move off to a very distant place with no smart meter, it can take years to recover, and even then, not completely.
It's just come on the forefront here in Kentucky and Indiana. So I'm just wondering if it's kind of moved across the country or maybe in more urban areas it came first. But for a lot of people, this is an opportunity to not have had exposure very long or to avoid it altogether.
Some people become symptomatic the very instant it's plugged in and it starts operating.
And they wouldn't necessarily know that that's why they're becoming sick. Some
They
people
start
might.
Yeah, many of them don't. They just say, "Wow, what's going on?" They go to their doctor, they go to the neurologist, they go to the psychologist,
Right.
uh, and nobody there has any answers except maybe give you some sort of palliative treatment to dope you down, and even so, the damage is still occurring. Radio frequency radiation, particularly pulsed, digitized, and polarized radiation, like the smart meter transmits, is alien not only to Earth, but the entire universe. This type of radiation signal is not found anywhere else in the entire universe. So
Right.
we have no built up immunity to it, and all it does is wear you down piece by piece.
Can you comment on, if somebody opts out and they're in a neighborhood and maybe the houses are fairly close? I've heard about sort of a web almost being created by the EMF that's coming off these meters.
Right.
Is that accurate?
Interesting. The smart meter actually says it transmits with a dynamic mesh network, kind of like a spider web.
Mm-hmm.
So one meter sends out a signal, and that signal goes to all the other meters, and then they retransmit it across all the intersections of the spider web until it finally gets back to the utility.
Let's say somebody does opt out, but they think they might still be getting exposure from neighbor smart meters. They could use a Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter. Is that what you would
Yeah,
suggest?
that one is good, but the Gigahertz Solutions HF59B with the UBB27 antenna is the best meter. So
And
I
that's what you
actually
would,
have,
that's would be more professional grade, correct?
yeah.
Okay.
And the good thing about those meters is they have sound identification, just like there's a difference between a duck, a crow, and a goose, the way they
Mm-hmm.
sound. There is a difference between cell tower, Wi-Fi, and
Right.
smart meters. So those two meters that we just talked about give you sound identification.
Mm-hmm.
Others don't. So if you want to know what kind of meter to get, you should contact a building biologist to find out what kind of meters he uses, what's the one in my price range, because I don't want to buy the wrong one. But I have data logs. I have no smart meter. They never got my analog meter. Um, I take 24-hour data logs, which is like a 24-hour seismograph chart, and it shows the transmissions from the house next door.
Oh
And
my.
there's
Okay.
5 times per day when I'm getting one transmission every 6 seconds,
Wow.
or about 703 transmissions per hour.
So do
Then there's
you
also,
do any shielding or anything I mean,
Oh, yes. On our bedroom wall, we do have floor to ceiling um, radiant barrier aluminized foil.
and for that reason, to be blocking what's coming in from neighbors.
Yes. And after a few years, my neighbor, he went from scoffing and mocking me and saying, "Oh my gosh, you've got that analog meter? That means you got to pay the utility to come out and read it." To maybe 5 years later, we asked him if we could put this shield on the meter. And he goes, "Yeah, will that be good for me too?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay, put it on."
Okay.
So he changed his tune, probably from what he had read and heard that people were being harmed by
Right.
these meters.
And how I pay $35 a month to opt out of a one-time fee that you had to pay to opt out.
Well, I had to pay $127 upfront one time and $14 a month for eternity. Now, PG&E has a $75 upfront one-time charge and then $10 a month for 36 months.
Okay. What could be done to a smart meter to at least try to lower the incoming exposure into the house?
Okay, number one, if you're sleeping in the same room that the smart meter is on, start sleeping in the other end of the house. Okay,
Hmm.
that's simple and free. It may be inconvenient, but so
And
move
the
your,
breaker box is what they would see within their house, and the smart meter is going to be on the other side of that, just so people
yeah,
can.
and for a variety of reasons, you do not want to sleep in a room where the electric panel is on the wall of that room. You should be sleeping at the other end of the house. Number two, if you want to try to shield it, put a collar around the smart meter.
And what
Like,
would, is that something they could, so a metal collar, could they just get that like at a hardware store or?
yeah, you can go down to Home Depot and actually get heating and air conditioning ductwork sections, some of
Mhm.
which have a 45-degree angle, so you can aim it out and up and away in case it's on your backyard. You don't want to irradiate your backyard, just aim it up and away. Then on the inside wall of your house, I recommend getting some aluminized radiant barrier insulation and putting it 8 feet wide and floor to ceiling. So it's 8 by 8 on the wall where the smart meter is. To
Where do
keep
people access that material?
you can you can get at Home Depot,
That as well. Okay.
and there's of course that stuff is pretty smelly. It smells like plastic. There's better sources. I mean, there's better material out there by far. But aluminized radiant barrier insulation, a double layer, staple it to the wall.
Okay.
Don't try to tape it up. That will fall off. It's pretty heavy. Staple it to the wall.
Okay. Okay. Very helpful. So, and you've mentioned, you know, people that are at retirement age and beyond, but um, for children too, that would be something with ADHD, autism, behavioral problems where nobody's realizing that it's the massive exposure that they're getting. Even maybe even not in their room, just living in the house with now having a smart meter. People in the audience are either parents of children that have mental health issues or certainly adults that are dealing with depression, anxiety, but also chronic complex illness with mold toxicity, Lyme, chronic fatigue, mast cell activation, and then people concerned about cognitive decline. And this topic and the type of work that you do seems that it's so important and serves the whole range of people that are dealing with brain-related symptoms.
Yeah, we're just talking about a small segment of the radio frequency spectrum.
Right. This falls under radio frequencies, and there's other types of EMF that
Mhm.
I'm hoping that we can talk about next time, including dirty electricity, magnetic, electrical fields that are within someone's house, not because of a smart meter, but just for other reasons. But before we sign off, tell tell people how they can find your services, but also your education. And if not you, what other options they may have.
After the battle with the smart meter, I realized I had to become a professional, just like you are, to be able to detect, measure, assign a risk level, and then propose and effectuate proven solutions. There's so much well-intended but totally misguided misinformation floating around out there by amateurs, or well-intended but misguided. Don't go
Mhm.
along with that. You may end up hurting yourself worse and certainly spending thousands of dollars in the wrong direction. You can find out more about me by going to Google and putting in Windheim EMF. Now, the critical word is Windheim, Windheim. So, wind as in wind blowing through the
Mhm.
air, Heim as in the German meaning for home. So it's Windheim, windy home.
Mhm. And I'll put a link in the descriptions for all the sites.
So you're going to see listings to my 145 YouTube videos,
Hmm.
4 of which are feature-length presentations. The rest are clips of what I find on the job.
Yeah, which is so helpful for people to be able to see.
I give anybody 10 minutes of free consultation, private, confidential consultation, just to find out what their concerns are, see if I can
Hmm.
help them. And sometimes they say, yeah, get on a plane and go to Missoula, Montana, or Denver, or San Diego. Those are the 4 out-of-town fly-out trips I've done so far. I've actually been to 12 states, all the way from Hawaii, northern Idaho, New Mexico, and back to Arlington, Virginia. So I go where people pay me to go. So you want to find out someone close to you, that's better. It's far better to have an on-site assessment than over the phone. And it can be done in some cases, but not in all. So you can go to the Building Biology Institute. They have a Find an Expert page. You can look up the certification of the expert you want, EMRS, and then it
Hmm.
shows them state by state, all the way from Canada to Mexico. Now you
Right.
want to interview that person and say, how long have you been doing this? How many years? How many assessments have you completed?
Hmm.
Do you do repair work? Do you come back with your network cabling expert to wire my house so I don't need Wi-Fi? Do you come back with your EMF electrician to sort out the violations of the National Electric Code so that my house doesn't have magnetic fields? So interview several.
What is your thought about people using the meters to assess if they have a problem before, let's say, having somebody travel? I mean, I guess there's a lot of gray there because if someone's feeling better outside of their house and maybe their meters aren't as effective as professional meters, then they could be missing something.
Okay, so what's your first step? Number one, when people call in, this is my actual form, it's a call-in form.
Hmm.
Question number one, are you symptomatic, yes or no? That means you feel better when you leave the house and worse when you come back. Yes, about 85% of the people that call me are that way. And the other 15% are just prudently precautionary. So I say, okay, so you're symptomatic, and I ask a few questions. Do you have dimmer switches, variable speed pool pumps, solar, variable speed HVAC system? What kind of light bulbs? Do you have Wi-Fi, et cetera, et cetera? And I say, okay, so I see 4 or 5 things here that are causing this problem. Now, if you want to, before you hire me to get on a plane and fly out there and point everything out, you might want to kind of prove it to yourself. So I recommend getting this meter,
Okay.
determine, use it as an indicator. It's not going to tell you how to solve the problem, but if you turn it on and you've got levels above this, you've got a problem.
Okay,
That means
great.
you have a problem.
So you
So,
do recommend that kind of in-between place of doing a little bit
well,
self-assessment
many people
with,
just say, come on out. It's only a 50 or 100-mile drive.
yeah, right.
Some people said,
Okay.
what are you doing tomorrow? And they flew me out to Durango, Colorado for a week. But most people, it's a process. They don't want to. If it can be
Right.
solved more economically, I'm all for that. So if
Hmm.
you want to get a couple $100 worth of meters, and I'm not talking toy meters, I'm talking something that's fairly accurate, you
Sure.
might end up spending $150, $600, or $800 on meters.
Depending
And
on if you're looking at the 4 types versus honing in on one. Is
right.
that the range?
So you can use that as an indicator. Then you got a
Mhm.
problem, okay? And then you can get back to me and decide if you want to hire me. It's a 200-mile drive each way.
Sure.
Personally, as far as I know, I have more experience than anybody north of Los Angeles and east and west of the Mississippi River. That's just on the number of uh,
Mhm. Yeah.
total assessments. Um, so you want
They're just
to
like,
get to know.
and just one last thing because it comes up a lot. There's a lot of gadgets and jewelry and little trinkets that people are selling that presumably lower EMF exposure and just do the job. So just comment on that before we go. And then I'd
Sure,
love if we could talk in the future about the other forms of EMF.
definitely. Okay, so what you're talking about is so-called subtle energy devices like decals, crystals,
Mhm.
minerals, um, metal triangles, or what have you. Um, we actually have a position paper on that. Okay, an official building biology position paper. And you go
Okay.
to the website, there's free fact pages, there's lots of valuable information there. Um, so most of these are totally worthless and they're a total scam, like a decal that you put on the back of your phone that's going to, quote, harmonize the radiation so that it's benign or maybe even beneficial, like vitamin C or sunlight. And our comment is it doesn't reduce the radiation at all. Sometimes these bowls or bags of minerals, such as shungite and other things like that,
Right. That comes up a
people
lot.
say this does calm them down. However, that doesn't mean that the damage isn't still occurring. Like you give an injured sport athlete a good shot of cortisone, he's going to feel better right away. I had that done on my shoulder when I tore my shoulder cartilage. Within 5 minutes, all the pain was gone. But he says it's going to take you 6 months to heal, and you're going to have to avoid using that arm. So it is a foolishness. And some of these things are not cheap. I remember
I was
this
going
one.
to say quite expensive.
There's this one about the size of a 16-ounce iced tea can. It looks like copper wire wound around it like the bobbin of thread. $2,500.
Sadly, there's so many people out there that are just desperate for relief of symptoms that this idea that there would be something that would just magically take care of all of it, lower their exposure, seems so
So
seductive.
that leads me back to my summary statement. If you want to know for sure, hire a professional who's
Mhm.
certified EMRS from the Building Biology Institute to detect, measure, assign a risk level, and then suggest proven solutions to you. Otherwise, you're wandering in the wilderness and you'll spend thousands, maybe tens of thousands of dollars, and maybe only hurt yourself more.
Right, right. And this, I think is so helpful. Just some of this is just for some people going to be planting seeds of this is something to know about, think about your experience in your home and your other environments. And then think about it in relation to your symptoms. So it's an evolution for many people, but I do think the meters and the measuring takes that understanding to a higher level. I know for me, I was somewhat in denial about EMF until I saw how high the exposure I was getting in these various types.
Well, like you, I have felt it in my own body on at least 12 occasions. And, for the next, putting in a plug for the other segments we'll be talking about, I can talk about the instantaneous change in people's well being and health when we just turn something off. People go from
Right.
suicidal to happy as a clam at high tide just by turning something off in their house.
Yes.
And the
It's
remarkable results with autistic children, people with pandas, and even cancer, the huge, unbelievable, but actual factual improvements in their health by just turning something in their house off.
Right. And that's a perfect lead in to what I hope will be the next conversation about dirty electricity, electric and magnetic fields. And I think just the focus on smart meters is a lot to sink in for people that aren't familiar. So really appreciate this is it's so important, and I think about it with all the patients that I see, and I'm often surprised that it's not people don't even know what they are still. So this is great information, and thank you for sharing your personal experience, professional and wisdom, and even your experience with people that have brain symptoms.
Yes, I remember one guy when we got rid of this source of his dirty electricity, he said, "I'm back in my right mind."
That's it.
Okay,
Exactly.
well, until next time, I look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening. I will share Eric's information in the links below. I'll also be sharing newsletters on topics related to EMF and the brain and ways we can lower our exposure. If you are interested in receiving these newsletters, please consider subscribing at CourtneySnyderMD.com. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.